الحمد لله العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So alhamdulillah, I just want to first just give you a quick update that say inshallah we will so obviously we have our session today, and inshallah if we do one more session before Ramadan we should be able to finish the book inshallah. If we do one more session, like maybe towards the end of February or very early March, maybe like the first Monday in March, which is the last Monday before Ramadan, if we can meet at that time, then we can finish the book, inshallah. And that means after Ramadan, we can start with Pinnacle Papers Volume 3, inshallah,
Actually,
which
if
is,
I recall, sorry uh, if I recall, even for PP1, we ended it just before Ramadan as well, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes, inshallah. Yeah, I think
Alhamdulillah.
we did. I think we did. Yeah, it's alhamdulillah. It's good. So it's a good break. It's a good break for us. So, yeah, so we can take this knowledge and implement it in Ramadan, inshallah, and after Ramadan. So that's it, because we got about 20 pages left of the book. So yeah, if we can do half of that today and then half of that next month, then we'll finish before Ramadan, inshallah. So today's section is on page 65, where the Sheikh says, he gives the title, Names and Titles Do Not Concern Us, like a tesmiyat, right? So what we're getting at here is, the Sheikh asks a question. He says, all these remedies we've been talking about rectifying the inward, rectifying our inward states, removing diseases from the heart, getting rid of jealousy, getting rid of envy, getting rid of like self-amazement, getting rid of so love of leadership, right? And all these diseases that he's mentioned, because again, just to recap, the main focus of this book, what the Sheikh is getting at in this book, is he's talking about how um, well, he's answering this question of why is it that we have so much Islamic activity going on, right? There are all these courses and classes and events and conferences and deen intensives and so on and so forth, marches, protests, whatever you want to call it. There's all these things going on, but the Muslim state, the overall state hasn't changed. We're still, we haven't rebuilt the Ottoman Empire. We haven't built up the Khilafah. We haven't, and nothing's really changed. And so what Imam al-Buti is getting at is he's saying, well, the issue is the inward. It's like, yes, there's all this activity on the surface. Yes, all the form is there, but what's the substance? What's actually on the inside? And he says, yes, people are doing all these things, but people have different intentions and motives, right? People are doing this for fame. They're doing it for money. They're doing it for one-upmanship, right? I mean, like, oh, just to show I'm better than that than so and so. So there is a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of envy. There's all these kinds of things that are dominating this so-called activity that's going on. And so what he's been talking about is how we address this problem, how we get over it, and how we recognize that we are Allah's slaves. We recognize we are utterly dependent on Allah, that everything we do, we're supposed to be pleasing Allah. We're supposed to be using all the gifts that Allah has given us to obey Allah and to please Allah. So then he gets to this point and he says, well, what do we call all these remedies? All these remedies of rectifying ourselves. Do we call this tasawwuf? Do we call this suluk? Do we call this tarbiyah? Right? There's other words. Do we call it zuhud? Do we call it ihsan? There's so many terms out there. Um, and he says all of these are valid. There's nothing wrong with terminology. Some people call it tasawwuf, some people call it suluk. But he says ultimately, the best name, the most accurate name is Islam. Because this is what Islam is about. You can't detach it. People call it tasawwuf or suluk, and then people get in their heads that it's something separate to Islam. It's like, no, this is Islam. And what he goes on to talk about is in this short chapters, he says, we have the Sufi Salafi dichotomy, right? And people think that it's two separate things. And again, there's a whole you could go into a whole discussion about the problem of dichotomies, right? Where it's like you're either this or you're that. It's like, no, there's a huge middle ground there. And what he's also getting at is the fact that, and again, just think about this. If we're talking about, for example, the importance of Tawheed, the importance of worship of Allah, right? Tawheed is not just worshiping Allah as if He's one and believing that Allah is one and there is no other God. That's Tawheed. But there's also the aspect of making sure that your worship is only for Allah alone. All your good deeds are only for Allah alone. Because if not, it's sort of, yeah, that's minor shirk, right? If you're doing good deeds to please people and to show off for people and to get a reputation to make and for people to praise you and say, oh, look at that guy, mashallah, he's such a nice recitation. Oh, mashallah, look at that guy, he fasts all the time. No, mashallah, look at that guy. right? If that's your motivation, that's a minor shirk, right? So purification of the heart, or ihsan, or tasawwuf, whatever you want to call it, is all. This is the core of Islam. This is the absolute ultimate core of Islam. So, um, so he says Islam. So the thing to bear in mind is that Islam is the word that describes everything that comes from the book, the Quran and the Sunnah. Islam is the only word that firmly brings together all these contexts. In fact, it is the name that refers to these contexts because the word Islam expresses the realization of Allah's monitoring of his slaves. And then he goes on to say, he says, conversely, if you make it separate, if you start breaking it up, you start using these words, and he says, um, it will be infiltrated by matters which are not from the essence of Islam and its rule. And he talks about innovations that come about. Just to summarize, what he says from page 66, 67 is he says that uh, when people start talking about tasawwuf as if it's something separate from Islam, then you get people talking about tasawwuf as if it is separate from Islam. I don't know what it's again. I don't know what it's like in Singapore, Malaysia, but in America, you have people. You have like Sufi Hindus, right? Sufi Christians, Sufi hippies, right? People are not even Muslim, call themselves Sufis. How do you have to solve about? How do you have to solve about Allah? How do you have to solve with Hanuman the Monkey King? It doesn't make any sense, right? And this is totally irrational. So he says we have to think about, yes, terminology is fine, but don't let it lead to this complete separation of mind where people think like Sufism is some sort of weird sect that's so attached to Islam, or it's completely apart from Islam, and people aren't even Muslim can be a part of it. No, tasawwuf, the core of tasawwuf again is making sure that everything you do is for Allah, and that you do everything with sincerity for Allah, and you have muraqabah, and you have muhasabah, you're aware the law is watching you, you're aware the laws take you into account, and you have taqwa. This is the core of tasawwuf, and this leads to what he says in the next chapter. But I just want to finish on one point here, and this is why, again, talking about like you have these again this Sufi Salafi dichotomy where there are people out there who, again, they don't take this stuff seriously, and they think that like having a daily wird, having a portion of the Quran every day that you read, having adhkar, right? You might read Hizb al-Bahr, you might read Hizb al-Atam, whatever it is that you read every day, the wird of Imam Nawawi. They think, oh, this is all like this innovation is, you shouldn't do it. But then these same people, as Imam al-Buti said earlier in the text, these same people in the morning and in the evening, instead of having these adhkar, right, which are legitimate, which should be done, whether it's a portion of the Quran, whether it's a dua or an adhkar, they're watching TV, they're watching YouTube, they're messing around on Facebook, they're playing video games. It's like, so, okay, so you tell me what's better. No, brother, it's bid'ah. That's okay, but you're just wasting your time watching football videos, right? Watching Messi highlights. Like, what are you actually doing? Right? That's beneficial with your time, right? Like, think about this. So that's why he says at the end, he says in his chapter, he says, if people were to stop and think, these people were to stop and think, they would realize that striving to rectify the soul and legitimate means of doing so, i.e., through dua, through dhikr, through citation of the Quran, through working on yourself, through muhasabah, through muraqab, all these things are the very essence and spirit of Islam. They would also realize that the means that people use to rectify their souls are nothing more than the Islam that the Messenger of Allah brought, and they would only call it its real name, right? Because again, if you take a book like an Imam al-Buti in Many Fatawa, and he says if you want to rectify yourself, do salawat on the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? Which is what we're commanded to do in Surah Al-Ahzab by 56. Sallu alayhi wa sallam with taslima, right? Send blessings and peace upon him. That's what you're supposed to do, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he says, you do that, and he will be your, and then he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, will be your murshid. And then he says, get the adhkar of Imam Nawawi. Get the adhkar of Imam Nawawi. Now, the adhkar of Imam Nawawi, that's not stuff that Imam Nawawi made up. That's called, the full title is al-adhkar min kalam Sayyid al-Abrar. That's the full title of the book, right? The dhikr that comes from the speech of the master of creation, the master of the human beings, the master of Allah, and you incorporate those adhkar into your day, the adhkar in the morning, the adhkar in the evening, the adhkar when you're getting dressed, the adhkar when you're eating, the adhkar when you're leaving your house, the adhkar when you're coming home, and so on and so forth, right? You incorporate all of these into your life. And he says, therefore, whenever uh, that which is called tasawwuf has any independent intrinsic nature in the illusion of some researcher, the Muslims will find the name Islam can accommodate and correctly express every aspect and branch therein. Right. So anytime someone tries to speak of tasawwuf as if it's something separate from Islam, the common Muslim should say, no, that's part and parcel. That's just Islam. That's not something special or unique. Right. So rectifying the heart, bettering yourself as a human being is not something that's just that's part of only a certain sect of Islam does, or it's something that's extra to Islam. No, it's part and parcel of Islam. It's the core of Islam. Then on page 69, Imam al-Buti then talks about moral tasawwuf and emotional tasawwuf. And what he gets at here is he's trying to stress here that, again, the tasawwuf we're talking about here, which is, again, is part and parcel of Islam, it's practical. We don't want to get bogged down in theories. And he says this is moral tasawwuf. It's not, it's a tasawwuf al-akhlaqi, right? We're trying to change our morals and our character. And he says, as for these other terms people use or states people talk about, like shuhud, annihilation, baqa, and so forth, these are descriptions for emotional states that those who take it upon themselves to make their hearts alert to that fact, the law of the exalted is always watching, and they strive not to be distracted from Allah's remembrance by any worldly phenomenon, gradually move through. Right? So people who are going through states, and I have a fatwa on my blog by Imam al-Buti called Purification of the Heart, and he talks about this. He says a lot of these states like fana and baqa and shuhud, these are states that happen to people as they're on the path, but they're not states that are sought out. Okay, this needs to be understood. These are states that happen to people as they're on the path, but they're not states that you seek. You don't seek baqa. You don't seek fana. It can happen. It can happen. It might not happen. That's why he says on the next page, he says that these states uh, happened after the age of the companions, because the companions were just udul. The companions were just strikingly upright. They were just there. They were just doing it. That was their state. They didn't have to go through any other state. That just was their state of being strikingly upright human beings and being the best human beings after the prophets. And this is why, and he's actually quoting Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, who said, because Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, of all people, as my teacher, my Hanbali teacher likes to call him, he's the world's most controversial Qadiri. That's what he was. He was a Qadiri, which was the Hanbalis are, right? The Hanabila are upon the tariqah of Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani, rahimahullah, and he says that, he says, for example, like, what is fana? Is the annihilation of witnessing anything but him, i.e. Allah, and this happens to many who travel the path, i.e. the salikin, due to their heart's excessive attachment to Allah's remembrance, worshiping him and loving him, and their hearts being too weak to witness other than what they worship and what they intend. Nothing but Allah occurs to their hearts, and they do not even notice anything else. When the one and al-fana reaches this state, his own existence is concealed in favor of his existence, i.e. Allah's existence, his own witnessing in favor of witnessing him, i.e. Allah, what he remembers in favor of remembering him, and what he knows in favor of knowing him, i.e. Allah. And then he said, i.e. Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, all of this fana contains deficiency, right? It implies deficiency. The great awliya, like Abu Bakr, Omar, and the forerunners from the emigrants and the helpers of the Ansar, the Muhajirun al-Ansar, they never fell into fana, let alone those above them, i.e. the prophets. This only happened after the age of the companions. Right? It's as if these are states that people go through when they're moving from a lower state to a higher state. Right? Whereas the people who are at the higher state, they don't have this. They don't have this. And then he makes this point. He says, it is not permissible for the Muslim who sees a shortcoming in himself in regard to Allah and notices disease of the heart, the removal from Allah exalted, to spend any of his time talking about philosophical and emotional tasawwuf, and dedicate himself to studying the states of such people and explain their various stations that we have briefly discussed, right? So what he's getting at here is stopping the talk, right? Because again, there are people who spend a lot of their time talking about tasawwuf and talking about Sufis and talking about great awliya of the past and using all the terminology, using all the terminologies out there. So they'll talk about baqa, they'll talk about fana, they'll talk about khalwa, they'll talk about historical events and this awliya, these awliya of Allah did this and this awliya of Allah did this and this, right? By the end of the day, it's just talk. It's like where is the actual practical implementation, right? What's the use of you stay up all night, you stay up all night talking about the great Sufis of the past, and then you sleep through Fajr. That doesn't fit, right? Or you talk, and then but you're actually overweight and you can't control your appetite, and you haven't learned to control yourself. So what he says is these matters are personal experiences that only can be understood by experiencing them, right? So for example, um, you don't. What people fail to understand is that again, for the people of Tasawwuf, for the people who travel the path of Tasawwuf, sometimes they had events in their life that we don't fully understand what happened, right? It was something that happened to them, right? So, for example, you take the story of Imam al-Ghazali, right? Hujjat al-Islam Muhammad al-Ghazali, a man who perfected Tasawwuf, right? Like when Imam al-Buti was asked about this in an interview, and he talked about Imam al-Ghazali, and he talked about Qadr Jilani, and he said like about them, he said, "Insanun kamil bidun wahy." It's like Nabuwa, but like these are it's like they're perfect human beings, but they don't have wahy. They're prophets without wahy, right? That's the maqam they reached. But that doesn't mean that you have to travel the exact same path, right? There, again, like everyone knows from Imam Ghazali, where he reached a crisis and he stopped teaching, and he just went and he stopped teaching, and he just left, and he traveled for a long, long time. That doesn't mean that you have to do the same thing. That's something that happened to Imam Ghazali, and that's who he is, and that's his special maqam. That's what he did. But what you have to focus on, if you're a simple believer, is you focus on rectifying yourself. You focus on rectifying what's in your own heart, rectifying your own deficiencies. And again, following these methods, having the adhkar, having the wird, having the du'as, trying to fast, trying to pray tahajjud, having salatul hajj, taking these practical steps and not wasting your time so much on uh, talking about things and reading about things that don't really affect you. So, for example, he says, you who are engaged in this, take Ibn Arabi's advice. So this is the Sufi Ibn Arabi, and leave his futuhat, right? He said, don't read his book Futuhat, right? Because that's very complicated. It's very verbose, very prolix, right? And it will cause confusion. Read his book, Maraj al-Quds fi Muhasabat al-Nafs, which is a book that unveils the flaws of Muslims and the dangerous illnesses and deficiencies that are hidden behind the celebrated and pompous appearances, such as ostentation, love of reputation, love of the world, and love of leadership. Leave him in his states and escapades. You don't have to go into the life of Ibn Arabi and other things, and the various ventures of his life. You don't have to go into that. All right. And whatever his words you don't understand, just focus on this. Right. So you want to read books with the soul, focus on these books that talk about how to rectify the various diseases of the heart that happen to people. And again, I recommend that, Imam Ghazali himself is wonderful. His books are wonderful. They're amazing. And so many of them are available in English. But even if you want something that's more condensed, that's what Imam Abdullah bin Ali al-Haddad, rahimahullah, that's what his books are for, right? This is from Yemen, from Hadramaut. These books like Book of Assistance, Knowledge of Wisdom, The Lies of Man. These are wonderful books. These are excellent books, and this is like it's like the Ghazalian message, but it's condensed and it's easier to digest, right? And these are the books people should be reading. You don't have to go to the Futuhat of Ibn Arabi. You don't have to go to these big books, right? You go to all these philosophies and theories, as Imam Ramadan calls them. Right? And then he says something interesting. He focuses, and he finishes on this point. He says, when the illnesses and afflictions of this world have been removed from your heart, and you've not been influenced by false tribalism, right? And again, this happens a lot. Again, what he's getting is again, people fall into this tribalism of like Salafi, Sufi, and then also the tribalism of a tariqah itself, right? People say, well, okay, well, I belong to this tariqah, he belongs to this tariqah, right? And then there's like competition between tariqahs. Well, he's a this and I'm a this, and his shit, right? And it's how is this rectifying the heart if you've got jealousy and bitterness towards other Sufis? It doesn't make any sense. So again, we want to leave aside the theorizing and the talking. We want to talk about the actual practical effect of it all. Um, it says when you've reached a state, or it doesn't matter whether the world turns towards you or away from you, whether people praise you and laud you, or rebuke you and defame you, it makes no difference. Right? When you've reached that maqam, which is a very high maqam, where it doesn't matter. This is like an Imam Ghazali level or Imam al-Jilani level, where it doesn't matter whether people praise you or hurt you, right, or defame you. When you've reached that level, then you can enter the door and go into that hazardous field. Then you can go and read books like Al-Futuhat or whatever. Right? You can read these kinds of things. You see? So again, what he's essentially saying is you're probably never going to get there anyway. Again, keep focusing on yourself. Keep focusing on yourself, right? When you reach that, when you're at the level of Imam Ghazali, which is very high level, then you can think about reading these other things. I'll try to slip in one more chapter before Q&A because I want to make sure we have enough. Well, I'll start the next chapter actually. So the next chapter, as he says, our problems are moral, not intellectual. And again, he says, everything we've discussed means that we are suffering from a problem to morals and emotion. There's no connection to conviction or intellection. And what he's getting at here, again, is he's talking about the fact that we have people who are engaged. Yeah, page 73. That's correct. Yes. We have people who are heavily engaged in the intellectual side of things, right? They're thinking, okay, we need to put more books out. We need to get more knowledge out. We need more course out. And this is how we'll fix things. And this is something we've discussed in previous lessons before. And again, this is the core of Imam al-Bulti's book, Al-Hub fil Quran. Al-Hub fil Quran, he talks about this. And he says that uh, that the intellect is not enough, right? People actually have to believe in it. People have to be moved in their heart. People have to actually love the truth. So uh, he says Muslims do not need any more intellectual studies. Muslims, despite their varying levels of education, have enough awareness of these matters to protect themselves. If it were the case, or if the case were that the matter depended on awareness alone. Okay, so like we're aware of these things. Muslims like everyone knows what jealousy is. Everyone knows what envy is. Everyone knows what arrogance is. Everyone knows what pride is. Everyone knows what these things are. But do we actually work towards rectifying them or protecting ourselves from them? He says, for example, the atheist who lives a life of doing whatever he wants and rejecting faith is not bound to this life of his because of something purely intellectual, as you might think. Rather, he's bound to it because of egoistic desires that have become ingrained in him. The Western scholar who delves into the mire of the material world and spends his time in vice does not do so because he's driven by certain philosophy or theory. He's driven to do so because of a moral illness that he suffers from, even though he tries to hide this fact forever and ever, right? Because again, people try to think, because again, Imam al-Buti, what he explains is he says that the fact that Islam is true is very easy, right? It's very obvious that Islam is the truth. Everyone knows Islam is the truth. People can see that it's the truth, but why do they not accept it? He says, you have Western academics who come up with better theories than Muslims do for the proof of a creator, right? They put together sophisticated arguments. They can show you, no, there's definitely a creator. There's definitely a system in place. Why aren't they Muslim? But well, they're not Muslim because they love something else. It's not about conviction. They love something else. They can be convinced Islam is true, but their passions, their desires. They enjoy drinking, they enjoy fornicating, they enjoy messing around with. That's what they like doing. So they don't become Muslim. This is the same thing we're talking about here, right? These people try to hide behind a smokescreen of, oh, we're so intellectual and we're so sophisticated and we can't see how Islam is true. No, it's nonsense. They have their desires that they need to fulfill. That's what it comes down to. Um, and he gives this interesting story. He says, I know a Pakistani man who lives somewhere in Europe and calls people to Islam. He was asked how successful his preaching had been, and he replied, that's what he said about preaching to Europeans. He said, the European man does not need proof in order to know the truth. He comes to believe in the truth very quickly, intellectually and sincerely. However, the excuse that always holds him back is the lack of restriction that his soul enjoys, right? The fact that he's free to do what he wants, okay? And which his life is based. And none of these ideas that he believes in can help him escape the power of his soul. right? Meaning his nafs, all right? And I've seen this myself. I remember when I went to university, because I became Muslim when I was at university, when I just started university way back in the year 2000. And I was sharing a dorm with like six other English guys, right, from different parts of England. And there's other guys next door as well. And we would have these discussions. And they would actually say to me, like one of them said to me, like, yeah, I could be Muslim. I can see how it's true, but I got to drink, man. So they say, like, yeah, I can see how Islam's true. Yeah, yeah, but I got to drink. I got to have my girlfriend. You see, it's the love of the desires that takes over, right? So what Imam Ramadan goes on to say, he says, you're not going to help these people. You're not going to help these people by giving them intellectual proofs, right? You're not going to help these people by giving them books about Islam, right? Because they know Islam's true. So you don't need to keep piling on more information, more stacks. And you need to read Maurice Bukai's book, Islam and Science. No, they're already there. They can see Islam's true. You have to get to their heart. You have to talk to their heart. And right, this is why Imam Waldi this book about the Quran talks about like you have to put love of Allah in people's hearts. Talk about what Allah's done for these people. But again, it's a huge problem. Again, I don't know what's like Malaysia and Singapore. I'm out here in the West. You know, my law saved me. Send me back east soon. But we're discussing Brother Jaladi. But you know, people here are getting like really into like ilm al kalam. They're getting really into like we need to get into these philosophical proofs and intellectual proofs and and it's like you're like you're I don't know what you're just wasting your time, right? You're not getting to the core of the problem. The core of the problem is that people need to be taught how to love Allah. They need to be reminded of everything Allah's done for them, everything Allah does for them. They need to talk about Allah's favors, Allah's blessings. You talk about the next life. You need to use a bit of tarhib and targhib, like make them desire Allah, make them fear Allah. All this intellectual stuff is it's just you're throwing your efforts to the wind. Um, but anyway, yeah, and that's why he says. So the intellectual link, he says, also research and studies have their benefit. He says, let this intellectual link have a sufficient share of our Islamic studies and research. But we don't want to fall into a vicious cycle of just debating our enemies, right? Because this is what it leads to. We're just debating them all the time. Like they bring out this proof, we bring this argument. They bring and just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And we're not getting to the core of bringing people to Allah. That's what's going to happen. So I'll finish there, inshallah. Which means we just have the conclusion and a little parting message next time, inshallah. So I'll close there for Q&A, inshallah.